Jason Miller was not a man who stood out in a crowd. He was average in every way. Average height, average build, and an average life filled with struggles most people would rather ignore. Every day he woke up before sunrise, packed his lunch, carefully to save money, and headed off to work at one of the tallest buildings in the city. His job wasn't glamorous. He was a janitor, cleaning floors and emptying trash cans for people who barely noticed him. But Jason didn't complain. He had a roof over his head, food on the table, and a little girl named Lily waiting for him, at home. That was enough, or so he told himself. The building where Jason worked was called Whitaker Tower, named after its owner, Charles Whitaker. Everyone knew who Charles was. He was one of those billionaires you saw on TV or read about in magazines. Tall, sharp-eyed, and always dressed in expensive suits, he seemed larger than life. People whispered stories about how he'd built his empire from nothing, turning ideas into gold with just a few keystrokes on his laptop. To Jason, though, Charles might as well have been living on another planet. Their worlds couldn't be more different. On this particular evening, Jason was finishing up his shift. It was late, past midnight, and the tower was eerily quiet. The usual buzz of office workers rushing around had long faded, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights. Overhead, Jason pushed his cart down the hallway, mopping up spills and collecting discarded coffee cups. As he reached the lobby, he paused to glance outside through the glass doors. The streets were deserted, lit only by the glow of streetlights reflecting off puddles left behind by an earlier rainstorm. That's when he heard it. A loud crash, followed by the screech of metal against concrete. Startled, Jason dropped the mop and ran toward the sound. Pushing open the heavy glass door, he stepped outside and froze. There, sprawled awkwardly on the wet pavement near the entrance, lay a man dressed in a tailored suit. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead and his breathing was shallow. Around him, pieces of twisted metal and shattered glass glittered under the dim light. For a moment, Jason stood there, unsure what to do. Then recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. The injured man was none other than Charles Whitaker himself. How could this have happened? Jason glanced upward, searching for answers. High above, he spotted a helicopter hovering unsteadily near the rooftop landing pad. Its rotors spun furiously, sending gusts of wind rippling through the air. Something must have gone wrong during the landing. Without wasting another second, Jason rushed to Charles's side. Kneeling beside him, he gently shook the unconscious man's shoulder. "Sir, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling. When there was no response, Jason pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services. While waiting for help to arrive, he removed his jacket and carefully draped it over Charles to protect him from the cold. The fabric was thin and worn, but it was all he had to offer. As Jason waited, his mind raced. What if someone blamed him for this? After all, he was just a janitor, an invisible cog in the machine. Would anyone believe he'd done the right thing? These thoughts gnawed at him, but he pushed them aside. Right now, saving Charles's life was the only thing that mattered. It felt like hours passed, though in reality it was probably only minutes before the ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed to the scene, their boots splashing through puddles as they assessed Charles's condition. One of them nodded approvingly at Jason. "Good job keeping him stable," she said. "You probably saved his life." Those words lingered in Jason's mind long after the ambulance sped away with Charles inside. For the first time in years, Jason allowed himself to feel a flicker of pride. Maybe he wasn't just a faceless worker after all. Maybe he'd made a real difference tonight. But the next morning, reality came crashing back down. Jason reported to work as usual, expecting everything to go on as normal. Instead, his supervisor called him into the office and handed him a termination letter. According to management, Jason had violated company policy by leaving his post to assist Charles. They claimed it created liability issues and cited security footage showing him abandoning his duties early. Just like that, Jason found himself unemployed. Walking home that afternoon, Jason felt numb. His dreams of providing a better future for Lily seemed further away than ever. Yet even amidst the despair, he couldn't bring himself to regret helping Charles. If given the chance, he knew he'd do it again. Little did Jason know, his act of kindness was about to set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Jason Miller sat on the edge of his worn-out couch, staring blankly at the TV screen. His mind wasn't focused on the news or the sitcom playing softly in the background. Instead, he replayed the events of the past 24 hours over and over again in his head. One moment he had been doing what anyone would consider the right thing, helping an injured man who had fallen from a helicopter. The next he was out of a job, accused of abandoning his duties and creating problems for the company. Life had a strange way of twisting things around, Jason thought bitterly. His apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic from the street below. It wasn't much, a cramped living room, a tiny kitchen, and one bedroom he shared with his 8-year-old daughter Lily. But it was home. For now, at least. Jason glanced at the stack of bills on the coffee table and sighed. Without a paycheck coming in, how long could they keep this place? He pushed the thought aside. Worrying wouldn't solve anything, not tonight. As darkness fell, Jason decided to step outside for some fresh air. Maybe walking around the block would clear his head. Pulling on his jacket, he opened the front door and stepped into the cool, evening breeze. The neighborhood was quiet as it usually was after sunset. Streetlights flickered to life, casting soft pools of light onto the pavement. Jason shoved his hands into his pockets and began to stroll aimlessly down the sidewalk. That's when he heard it, a low rhythmic thumping sound growing louder in the distance. At first, Jason thought it might be thunder rolling in, but the noise was too steady, too mechanical. Looking up, his eyes widened in disbelief. 3 sleek black helicopters appeared in the sky, their rotors slicing through the air with precision. They moved swiftly, heading straight toward his neighborhood. Jason froze, watching as the helicopters circled overhead like giant birds of prey. His heart pounded in his chest. What were they doing here? This wasn't exactly the kind of area where military drills or secret operations took place. Slowly, the helicopters descended, landing in the empty lot across the street from his house. Dust swirled in the air as the rotors slowed to a stop. Before Jason could process what was happening, armed men in tactical gear poured out of the helicopters, moving with purpose and efficiency. For a moment, Jason wondered if he should run back inside and lock the door, but curiosity held him rooted to the spot. Then, among the chaos, a familiar figure emerged. It was Charles Whitaker, the billionaire Jason had helped just the night before. Charles walked with the aid of a cane, his movements slow but deliberate. Despite the injury, he carried himself with the same commanding presence Jason had seen on television. Jason's stomach churned. Why was Charles here? Had he come to thank him personally? Or worse, had Jason somehow gotten himself involved in something dangerous without realizing it? As these questions raced through his mind, Charles approached him, flanked by 2 guards. Up close, Jason noticed the dark circles under Charles's eyes and the bandage still visible beneath his neatly styled hair. Clearly, the fall had taken its toll. "Mr. Miller," Charles said, his voice calm but firm. "I trust you remember me." Jason nodded nervously. "Yes, sir, I'm glad to see you're okay." Charles gave a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You saved my life last night. I owe you more than words can express." He paused, glancing briefly at the helicopters behind him. "Unfortunately, your good deed came at a cost. I understand you lost your job because of what you did." Jason shifted uncomfortably. "It's fine, really. I mean, I'd do it again if I had to." Charles studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. "That's precisely why I'm here. People like you are rare these days, Mr. Miller. Loyalty, integrity, qualities like those are worth protecting, and I intend to do just that." Before Jason could respond, Charles gestured to one of the guards who handed him a folder. "Inside, you'll find an offer of employment at one of my companies. Not as a janitor, but in a position that matches your skills and potential. You'll have financial stability, benefits, and opportunities you've likely never dreamed of. All I ask is that you accept." Jason stared at the folder in stunned silence. Was this real? Could someone like Charles Whitaker truly be offering him a second chance? Part of him wanted to jump at the opportunity, but another part felt uneasy. Accepting charity, even if it came disguised as a job offer, wasn't something Jason took lightly. Still, he knew he couldn't afford to turn it down, not with rent due and Lily depending on him. I don't know what to say, Jason admitted finally. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I won't let you down. Charles nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. We'll discuss the details tomorrow. For now, get some rest. You've earned it. With that, Charles turned and headed back toward the helicopters, his guards following closely behind. Within minutes, the machines roared to life, lifting off the ground and disappearing into the night sky. Jason stood there for a long time, clutching the folder tightly in his hands. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, gratitude, confusion, and a gnawing sense of unease. Something about the whole situation felt off. But for now, all he could do was take it one step at a time. When Jason returned to his apartment, he found Lily asleep on the couch, her school books scattered around her. She had stayed up late trying to finish her homework, even though she knew he wouldn't be able to help her with the harder problems. Smiling faintly, Jason tucked her into bed and kissed her forehead. Tomorrow would be better, he promised himself. For both of them. But as he lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, Jason woke up earlier than usual. His mind was restless, replaying the events of the previous night over and over again. Helicopters landing in his quiet neighborhood, Charles Whitaker showing up at his doorstep, and an unexpected job offer. It all felt like something out of a movie. Yet the folder sitting on his kitchen table was very real. He opened it cautiously, half expecting to find some kind of catch. But inside were official-looking documents detailing his new role, Assistant Operations Manager at Whitaker Innovations, one of Charles's flagship companies. Jason didn't know much about Whitaker Innovations, except that it was known for cutting-edge technology. On paper, the position seemed impressive. A decent salary, health benefits, even stock options. It was more than he'd ever hoped for. Still, something nagged at him. Why would a billionaire go out of his way to hire someone like him? Was this really just about gratitude, or was there more to it? By noon, Jason arrived at the company headquarters. The building was unlike anything he'd ever seen. A towering structure made entirely of glass and steel, its surface shimmering under the sunlight. Inside, the lobby was equally breathtaking. Polished marble floors, minimalist furniture, and a reception desk staffed by people who looked like they belonged in a fashion magazine. Jason felt out of place in his jeans and flannel shirt, but no one gave him a second glance as he approached the front desk. "Hi," he said nervously. "I'm Jason Miller. I have a meeting with Mr. Whitaker." The receptionist nodded politely and handed him a visitor badge. "Take the elevator to the top floor. Someone will meet you there." As the elevator climbed higher, Jason couldn't help but marvel at how far he'd come in such a short time. From mopping floors to riding elevators reserved for executives, it was surreal. When the doors opened, he stepped into a spacious office area filled with modern equipment and glowing screens. At the far end of the room stood Charles Whitaker, waiting for him. "Welcome, Mr. Miller," Charles said, extending a hand. "I trust you found everything easily." "Yes, thank you," Jason replied, shaking his hand firmly. "This place is amazing." Charles smiled faintly. "Indeed. Now, let's get started. Follow me." He led Jason through a series of corridors until they reached a secure door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Charles scanned his fingerprint, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a high-tech control room, complete with holographic displays and rows of computer terminals. Jason's eyes widened as he took it all in. This wasn't just a tech company. It was a fortress of innovation. "This is where we oversee our most critical projects," Charles explained. "You'll be working closely with our team to ensure smooth operations. Don't worry, you won't need any special skills right away. We'll train you." Jason nodded, trying to absorb everything. Despite Charles's reassurances, He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. Still, he reminded himself why he was here. For Lily, for stability, for a better future. Over the next few days, Jason settled into his new routine. He attended meetings, reviewed reports, and learned the basics of the company's systems. Everyone treated him with respect, though he noticed that some employees whispered among themselves when he wasn't around. It didn't take long for him to realize that his sudden promotion had raised eyebrows. After all, he hadn't exactly earned his way in. He'd been handpicked by Charles himself. One afternoon, while exploring the facility during his lunch break, Jason stumbled upon a restricted section. Curiosity got the better of him, and he swiped his access card, hoping it might work. To his surprise, the door clicked open. Inside, he found a massive room filled with advanced machinery and glowing monitors. One wall displayed a holographic map of the world, dotted with red markers indicating various locations. Another screen showed intricate blueprints labeled Project Phoenix. Jason's heart raced as he moved closer. What was Project Phoenix? He skimmed through the data, piecing together fragments of information. It appeared to involve artificial intelligence, surveillance systems, and something called global stabilization protocols. Whatever it was, it sounded both revolutionary and dangerous. Before he could dig deeper, alarms blared loudly, startling him. Red lights flashed overhead, and within seconds armed guards rushed into the room. Jason froze, his hands raised instinctively. I didn't mean to," he stammered, but the guards ignored him, surrounding him with weapons drawn. Moments later, Charles entered the room, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing here?" he asked sharply. I got lost," Jason lied, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to intrude." Charles studied him for a moment before waving off the guards. "Leave us," he ordered. Once they were alone, he sighed heavily. "Jason, I brought you here because I trusted you. Do you understand what happens if sensitive information falls into the wrong hands?" "I'm sorry," Jason said quickly. "I wasn't trying to snoop, I swear." Charles rubbed his temples, clearly conflicted. Finally, he gestured toward the holograms. "If you're going to work for me, you deserve to know the truth. Project Phoenix isn't about control, it's about protection. After my accident, I realized how fragile our world is. Natural disasters, economic collapses, pandemics. Humanity isn't prepared for these threats. So I created technology to predict and prevent them." Jason listened intently, his initial fear giving way to awe. "That's incredible," he murmured. "But why keep it secret?" "Because not everyone shares my vision," Charles admitted grimly. "Some want to use this technology for power, for profit. If they succeed, it could lead to chaos. That's why I operate in the shadows." For the first time since starting this job, Jason understood the weight of his decision. This wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder. It was about joining a mission that could shape the future of humanity. And whether he liked it or not, he was now part of it. After learning about Project Phoenix, Jason's life took on a new dimension. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a responsibility. Charles had trusted him with the truth, and now Jason felt obligated to prove himself worthy of that trust. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into his work, determined to understand the complexities of the project. He spent hours studying reports, attending briefings, and shadowing senior staff members. Slowly but surely, he began to piece together how everything fit together. One day, while reviewing data in the main control room, Jason met someone who would change his perspective entirely: Laura Bennett. She was an engineer working on the technical side of Project Phoenix, known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude. With her short brown hair, glasses perched on her nose, and a clipboard always in hand, she looked like the kind of person who didn't tolerate nonsense. At first, Jason found her intimidating, but he soon realized she was just passionate about her work. "Hey, you're the new guy, right?" Laura asked one afternoon, catching him staring at a particularly complicated diagram on the wall. "Don't worry if it doesn't make sense yet. Even I'm still figuring some of this stuff out." Jason chuckled nervously. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in." Laura leaned against the desk, crossing her arms. "You know, Most people wouldn't stick around after finding out what we're really doing here. But you seem different. I guess I am, Jason admitted. I've never been part of something this big before. It feels important. It is important, Laura said firmly, but it's also dangerous. There are people out there who want to use this technology for their own gain. If they succeed, it could ruin everything we're trying to build. Her words lingered in Jason's mind long after their conversation ended. For the first time, he understood the stakes fully. This wasn't just about protecting humanity. It was about fighting back against forces that sought to exploit it. And as daunting as that sounded, Jason knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. As days turned into weeks, Jason and Laura grew closer. They started collaborating on various aspects of the project, combining his growing operational knowledge with her technical expertise. Together, they uncovered patterns and connections that others had missed. One evening, while analyzing surveillance data, they stumbled upon something alarming: encrypted messages between unknown parties discussing plans to infiltrate Whitaker Innovations. "This isn't good," Laura muttered, leaning over the computer screen. "Whoever these people are, they're not amateurs." Jason frowned. "Do you think they're inside the company?" "It's possible," Laura replied grimly. "We need to tell Charles." They arranged a meeting with Charles the following morning. When they presented their findings, his reaction was immediate and decisive. "We can't let them get close to Project Phoenix," he said, pacing the room. "If they manage to steal the technology, it could destabilize entire nations." "What do we do?" Jason asked, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Charles stopped pacing and looked directly at Jason. "You two have already done more than anyone else to uncover this threat. From now on, you'll work together to protect the project. I'll give you access to resources you'll need, but be careful. Trust no one." With that, Jason and Laura were thrust into a covert operation. Their mission was simple yet daunting: identify the infiltrators and expose them before they could act. It wasn't easy. Every lead seemed to lead to dead ends, every clue shrouded in mystery. But Jason refused to give up. He remembered why he'd started this journey: to provide a better future for Lily, and that kept him going. One night, while combing through files in a secure server room, Jason and Laura discovered a list of names. Some belonged to high-ranking officials within governments, others to corporate executives. All of them were linked to secret meetings held under the guise of diplomatic negotiations. "These aren't just random individuals," Laura whispered, her voice trembling with urgency. "This is a conspiracy." Jason nodded, his heart pounding. "And if we don't stop them, they'll destroy everything Charles has built." The realization hit them both like a freight train. They weren't just fighting for a project, they were fighting for the future. Armed with this knowledge, they devised a plan to leak evidence of the conspiracy to the public. It was risky, but it was their only chance to ensure transparency and accountability. Over the next several days, Jason and Laura worked tirelessly, gathering documents, securing proof, and encrypting files to prevent tampering. They knew they were running out of time. The conspirators were closing in. Yet despite the danger, they pressed on, driven by a shared determination to see justice served. Finally, the moment came. Under the cover of darkness, they uploaded the evidence to multiple independent news outlets, ensuring it would reach the widest possible audience. As dawn broke, headlines blared across the globe exposing the corruption and greed threatening to hijack Project Phoenix. For Jason, it was a moment of triumph, but also reflection. He had come so far from the janitor who once felt invisible. Now, he stood alongside people who believed in making the world a better place. And though challenges lay ahead, he knew he was ready to face them. Little did he know, the fight was far from over. The morning after Jason and Laura leaked the evidence, the world seemed to hold its breath. News outlets buzzed with reports about the conspiracy tied to Project Phoenix. Governments scrambled to respond, corporations denied involvement, and public outrage grew louder with each passing hour. For Jason, it was surreal to see the impact of their actions unfold on such a massive scale. One moment, he was just a janitor trying to make ends meet. Now he was part of something that could reshape the future. At Whitaker Innovations, the mood was tense but hopeful. Charles called an emergency meeting in the main control room, where Jason, Laura, and several key members of the team gathered. Everyone knew they were at a critical juncture. While exposing the conspiracy had been a victory, it wasn't the end of the fight. Powerful people didn't like having their secrets aired, and retaliation was almost guaranteed. "Congratulations," Charles began, his tone measured but firm. "You've done what many thought impossible. But let me be clear. This is only the beginning. Those we exposed won't go quietly. They'll try to discredit us, destroy our work, or worse." Jason exchanged a glance with Laura. Neither of them needed reminding of the risks. Over the past few days, they'd received anonymous threats, seen strange cars parked outside their homes, and felt the constant weight of being watched. Still, neither of them regretted their decision. If anything, they were more determined than ever to protect Project Phoenix. "We need to stay one step ahead," Laura said, breaking the silence. "If we can anticipate their moves, we might have a chance." Charles nodded approvingly. "Exactly. That's why I'm restructuring our security protocols and putting you two in charge of safeguarding the project. You've earned my trust, and I believe you're the best people for the job." Jason swallowed hard. He still wasn't used to hearing praise, especially from someone like Charles. But he couldn't deny the sense of purpose he felt. This wasn't just about protecting a piece of technology. It was about ensuring it served humanity instead of harming it. Over the next few weeks, Jason and Laura worked around the clock to fortify the company's defenses. They implemented new encryption methods, rerouted data through secure servers, and even designed decoy systems to mislead potential attackers. It was exhausting work, but they pushed forward, fueled by adrenaline and determination. One evening, while reviewing security logs, Jason noticed something odd. A series of login attempts had been flagged as suspicious, originating from an unknown IP address. At first glance, it seemed minor, a failed hack attempt, nothing unusual. But when he dug deeper, he realized the pattern matched previous breaches, linked to the conspirators. "Laura, look at this," Jason said, pointing to the screen. "They're testing us, probing for weaknesses." Laura frowned, her eyes scanning the data. "It's a distraction. They're trying to draw our attention away from something bigger." "What do you mean?" Jason asked, feeling a knot form in his stomach. "They're planning another attack," she replied grimly. "And if we don't figure out where they'll strike next, we're in trouble." The realization sent a chill down Jason's spine. They had managed to expose the conspiracy, but stopping it entirely would require more than just intelligence. It would take courage, strategy, and maybe even sacrifice. Determined to stay ahead, Jason and Laura devised a plan. Using the information they had gathered, they set up a trap. They created a fake database filled with false data, designed to lure the conspirators into revealing themselves. It was risky. If the attackers discovered the deception, they could retaliate violently, but it was their best shot at identifying the masterminds behind the plot. As they waited for the trap to spring, tensions ran high. Jason found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder, half expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. Laura tried to reassure him, but even she couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. Together they leaned on each other for support, finding strength in their shared mission. Finally, the moment came. Late one night, alarms blared throughout the facility. Someone had accessed the fake database, triggering the alert system. Jason and Laura rushed to the control room where Charles was already waiting. "It's working," Laura said, her voice steady despite the chaos. They took the bait. On the monitors, they tracked the source of the breach to a remote server farm located overseas. With Charles's approval, they contacted international authorities, providing them with the location and evidence needed to shut down the operation. Within hours, news broke that law enforcement agencies had raided the server farm, arresting several individuals tied to the conspiracy. Among them were high-profile figures whose names had appeared in the leaked documents. Public outrage reached a fever pitch, forcing governments to launch investigations into corruption and misconduct. For Jason, the victory was bittersweet. He had helped expose a global threat, but the cost of doing so weighed heavily on him. Sleepless nights, constant danger, and the knowledge that powerful enemies still lurked in the shadows. It all took its toll. Yet he reminded himself why. He had started this journey. For Lily, for a better future, for hope. As the dust began to settle, Charles called Jason and Laura into his office. For once, his usual stern demeanor softened into something resembling gratitude. "You've done extraordinary work," he said, looking at them both. "Not just for me, but for humanity. Project Phoenix will continue, and it will succeed because of people like you." Jason felt a lump rise in his throat. He had never imagined he'd hear those words from someone like Charles. More importantly, he finally believed them. Despite everything, he had made a difference. But as Charles dismissed them, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't truly over. Somewhere out there, forces still sought to exploit Project Phoenix for their own gain. And though he had faced incredible challenges, he knew he was ready to keep fighting. For justice, for integrity, and for the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Little did he know, the greatest test of all was yet to come. The weeks following the raid on the server farm were a whirlwind of activity. Investigations into the conspiracy spread across the globe, uncovering layers of corruption that shocked even the most jaded observers. Governments launched reforms. Corporations faced lawsuits, and public trust in institutions began to rebuild, slowly but surely. For Jason Miller, it was both exhilarating and exhausting. He had played a key role in exposing the truth, but now he faced the challenge of ensuring Project Phoenix remained protected and used responsibly. Charles Whitaker took a step back from the spotlight after the dust settled. Though he continued to oversee Whitaker Innovations, he entrusted Jason and Laura with the day-to-day management of Project Phoenix. It was a responsibility neither of them took lightly. Together, they worked tirelessly to implement safeguards, ensuring the technology would benefit humanity rather than harm it. One morning, as the sun rose over the city, Jason found himself standing on the rooftop balcony of Whitaker Tower. Laura joined him shortly afterward, carrying 2 cups of coffee. They sipped quietly, watching the world wake up below them. Despite everything they had been through, there was a sense of peace in the air, a feeling that they had turned a corner. "You know," Laura said finally, breaking the silence, "when I started working here, I thought this project would either save the world or destroy it. Turns out it's somewhere in between." Jason nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. "Yeah, I guess that's life. Nothing's ever black and white." Laura chuckled softly. "Still, we did good. You did good, Jason. Don't forget that." For a moment, Jason allowed himself to feel proud. He thought about all the challenges he'd overcome, the fear, the uncertainty, the sacrifices, and how far he'd come since those days as a janitor. Helping Charles Whitaker hadn't just changed his circumstances, it had transformed who he was. He was no longer the invisible man, unnoticed and undervalued. He was someone people counted on, someone making a difference. But pride wasn't something Jason could afford to dwell on, not yet. There was still work to be done. While the immediate threat had been neutralized, the battle against greed and exploitation was far from over. Powerful forces would always seek to misuse technology for their own gain. It was up to Jason, Laura, and others like them to stand firm and protect what mattered. As if reading his thoughts, Laura spoke again. "We're not done, are we?" "No," Jason replied, shaking his head. "Not by a long shot, but we've got each other and we've got a purpose. That's enough for now." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Turning around, they saw Charles walking toward them, his cane tapping lightly against the floor. He looked tired but content, as though a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I wanted to thank you both," Charles said, stopping beside them. "What you've accomplished goes beyond anything I could have hoped for. Project Phoenix will thrive because of your efforts." Jason exchanged a glance with Laura before responding. "It's not just us, Mr. Whitaker. It's everyone who believes in doing the right thing. We couldn't have done it alone." Charles smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the rising sun. Perhaps. But leaders like you inspire others to follow. Never underestimate the power of integrity. With that, Charles turned and walked away, leaving Jason and Laura alone once more. They stood in silence for a while, letting the moment sink in. For Jason, it was a reminder of why he had chosen this path. Saving Charles's life had been an act of kindness, but protecting Project Phoenix was about something bigger. Hope. Later that day, Jason returned home to find Lily waiting for him, sitting cross-legged on the couch with a book in her lap. She looked up when he entered, her face lighting up with excitement. "Dad, you're home!" she exclaimed, running over to hug him. Jason knelt down, wrapping his arms around her tightly. "Hey, kiddo. How was school today?" "It was okay," Lily replied, pulling back to look at him. "But I missed you. Are you staying for dinner this time?" Jason felt a pang of guilt. Over the past few months, he had missed too many meals, too many moments with his daughter. But today, he was determined to make things right. "Absolutely," he said, ruffling her hair affectionately. "And I'll even help you with your homework afterward." Lily grinned, and for the first time in a long while, Jason felt truly present. He realized that no matter how much the world changed, some things would always remain constant, like the love between a father and his child. That night, as Lily drifted off to sleep, Jason sat by her bedside, watching her chest rise and fall with each breath. He thought about everything he had fought for and everything he still hoped to achieve. Life wasn't perfect, but it was better than it had been, and for now, that was enough. In the weeks and months that followed, Jason threw himself into his work with renewed energy. Under his leadership, Project Phoenix became a beacon of innovation and ethical responsibility. Technologies that once seemed like science fiction were rolled out to improve lives worldwide, predicting natural disasters, preventing economic collapses, and fostering global cooperation. Jason also made a point to stay grounded. He never forgot where he came from or the lessons he had learned along the way. Kindness, courage, and integrity. They were the values that had carried him through the darkest times, and they were the ones he hoped to pass on to Lily. One evening, as Jason and Laura reviewed plans for the next phase of Project Phoenix, Laura leaned back in her chair and sighed. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever get a break." Jason laughed softly. "Probably not, but hey, if we can handle conspiracies and global threats, I think we can handle whatever comes next." Laura smirked. "Spoken like someone who's seen it all." "Not quite," Jason admitted, "but I'm getting there." As they returned to their work, Jason glanced out the window at the glowing city skyline. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged, not just to a job or a cause, but to something greater, something worth fighting for. And as the lights of the city twinkled like stars in the distance, Jason knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with hope, determination, and the unwavering belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the world.